Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our electric vehicle webinar as we are preparing and planning for EV charging infrastructure here in Pennsylvania. Next slide. Today's webinar is being recorded and afterwards will be posted on our website so that those who were not able to join will have access to it. If you do have any questions at all throughout the webinar, you can use the chat function. There will be two opportunities throughout the presentation for question and answer, and that is how you will be able to ask your questions by putting them into the chat feature. Next slide. Today, we have a lot of information that we want to share with all of you related to electrification here in Pennsylvania. We're going to have an introduction by PennDOT Secretary Gramian. We are going to talk to you a little bit about why electrification, what the benefits are, the vehicle sales going on here in the state, and then some background on the federal funding that Pennsylvania will be receiving related to electrification, and then plenty of opportunities for questions and answer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the show over to Secretary Gramian from PennDOT.
Thank you, Natasha. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the electric vehicle webinar. Transportation is truly at a pivotal moment. Technology and innovation presents us with an opportunity to reinvent transportation in a way that is smarter, cleaner, safer, more equitable, and more efficient than ever before. And electric vehicles are central to this. We have already started our preparation for a future filled with electric vehicles. That preparation is critical on many fronts and has us well positioned to leverage federal actions. President Biden's goal of 50% of new vehicles being electric by 2030 aligns with commitments from the automotive industry. And more consumers are replacing their gas-powered vehicles with electric vehicles. Today, we have over 23,000 EV registered in Pennsylvania. That's more than doubled since 2019, when there were only roughly 9,700 vehicles. So we're pleased that the federal bipartisan infrastructure law, among other benefits, will bring more than $170 million to Pennsylvania over 5 years for EV charging infrastructure. This funding can be used to install and operate electric vehicle chargers, install traffic control devices to communicate with charging infrastructure, install signage and advanced development, and expand mapping and analysis necessary for equipment installation. We are confident that these new funds will pay dividends for Pennsylvanians. The funding supports the Commonwealth goal of expanding EV charging along our designated alternative fuel corridors and interstate lookalikes. The bipartisan infrastructure law's benefits extend beyond PennDOT's work. Beyond dedicated EV formula funding, there will be an additional $2.5 billion in discretionary grants opportunities for all alternative fuel infrastructure. Eligible entities like municipalities, school districts, planning organizations, and more will be able to apply for these funds. Grant funds will also be available for electrifying school bus fleets and EV battery manufacturing and recycling programs. This is all very exciting, and both PennDOT and DEP were looking hard and working hard preparing for these increased investments. However, we can't talk about increased adoption of electric vehicles without acknowledging the fact that currently, gas tax revenue provides 78% of Pennsylvania's highway and bridge funding. In Pennsylvania, we rely on the gas tax far more heavier than our surrounding states, as you can see in this chart. But due to increased electric vehicle adoption and better fuel efficiency overall, we are losing between $15 to $20 million in gas tax revenue every month. And while this is a great thing for our environment and our climate, it underscores the need to reimagine how we fund transportation in Pennsylvania and reduce our dependency on this unreliable source of revenue. At PennDOT, We have launched the Pathways program to help us identify new sustainable funding solutions to support our transportation into the future. We must support this new electric future and modernize our funding structure so our transportation network gets the support it needs to keep Pennsylvanians moving. Now I'll turn things over to Colton Brown from DEP to continue the program. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Secretary Gramian. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Colton Brown. I work in Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection within our Energy Programs Office, where I work with electric vehicle programs. So we're going to start by just having a knowledge foundation for electric vehicles, so we understand a lot of the terms and items that PennDOT will be covering here. So why are we and why is everybody talking about electric vehicles? So there's several benefits of electric vehicles. I'm going to summarize two of the big ones right here. So first off, electric vehicles cost a lot less to own and to fuel and to operate. An electric vehicle charged on a standard residential electricity rate in Pennsylvania right now would cost the equivalent in electricity of about $1.25 per gallon of gasoline. So you can see that it costs a lot less to fuel that electric vehicle. Additionally, electric vehicles cost less to maintain as there are fewer moving parts. All electric vehicles do not require oil changes. The brake regeneration system reduces wear on the braking system. There's an estimated reduction of about 40% in maintenance cost of an electric vehicle compared to its gasoline vehicle counterpart. A second large benefit of electric vehicles is the reduced emissions from the vehicle. Even over the vehicle's life cycle, switching to an electric vehicle reduces that vehicle's emissions by about 2/3 as compared to its gasoline counterpart. That electric vehicle will continue to emit less every year as the electric grid is fueled with less energy or less emission intensive sources. So over time, your electric vehicle will get even better as our electric grid gets cleaner. Next slide. So now what do we mean when we say electric vehicle? We're all very familiar with our gasoline and diesel powered vehicles. And many of us are also now familiar with a hybrid vehicle, which have been around for over 2 decades now. So a hybrid vehicle adds a small electric motor and small electric battery to that regular internal combustion engine. That allows for some improved efficiencies, brake regeneration that we mentioned earlier. Sometimes these are called hybrid electric vehicles, but for the purposes of our discussion today, we are not including regular hybrid vehicles when we discuss electric vehicles. Next slide. The vehicles that we are referencing today are plug-in hybrids and all-electric vehicles. A plug-in hybrid is just like that hybrid we described on the last slide, except it has a larger battery pack and a larger electric motor, which allows it to travel which allows it to receive electricity from an external source and then travel in electric-only mode for a certain number of miles, often between 10 and 50 miles, before the gasoline engine would kick on for extended range. And electric vehicles have no internal combustion engine. They are powered solely by an external electricity source. And this is where we see the greatest benefit and emission reduction for electric vehicles. Hydrogen vehicles do also fall into the category of electric vehicle, but we do not currently have hydrogen fueling or hydrogen vehicles for sale in Pennsylvania. So we'll probably primarily be referencing these two vehicle types today. Next slide. Now, most initial questions about electric vehicles have to do with charging, how you fuel the vehicle. Most of us have grown up becoming very familiar with gasoline vehicles, how to fuel them, how to operate them. So charging is new, and it's a little more nuanced as there are different speeds that you can charge an electric vehicle. The slide summarizes those charging speeds. On the left, we have level 1 AC charging. This is commonly called a trickle charge. It is when you plug an electric vehicle into a regular wall outlet, which all electric vehicles are capable of. They all come with the cord to be able to do so. This will give you about 4 to 5 miles of vehicle range per hour that you're charging at this speed. That may sound very slow, but if you have the ability to charge this way overnight, that will give you 30 to 50 miles of vehicle range per day, which for a plug-in hybrid is often enough to fully recharge the battery. And even for an all-electric vehicle, for many people, that's about how many miles they drive each day. So many electric vehicle owners, even those that could install faster charging at home, choose not to because level 1 charging is sufficient for their needs. Most charging does occur at level 2 speeds, which is the equivalent of, if you think of an electric dryer outlet at your house, it's that 220 volt line. It's usually somewhere between 30 and 40 amps. And that will get you in a plug-in hybrid, about 10 to 15 miles of vehicle range per hour. Plug-in hybrids often don't need to charge any faster than that, so the vehicle will limit it. And all electric vehicles will generally get 20 to 25 miles of vehicle range per hour charging this way. This means that most all electric vehicles with ranges between 200 and 300 miles will be able to get a full charge either overnight at home or during the day at work or during a work shift, whenever that is. So those vehicles can be fully charged every day. And if you're getting a full charge every day, that can meet the vast majority of your traveling needs, and you would rarely need to rely on any other charging methods. Somewhere between 80 to 90% of charging occurs at level 1 and level 2 speeds, and that is likely to continue being the case. Lastly, we do have DC fast charging, which, as it sounds, is the fastest form of charging. It is oftentimes designed based on the vehicle to be able to get you to an 80% state of charge within 20 to 30 minutes, about the time that it would take for a meal break if you were traveling a long distance and needed a break. DC fast charging is most commonly occurs along interstate highways, other long distance corridors where people may be traveling longer than the range of their vehicle, and they need to stop for a break to get a meal and charge up their vehicle while they're there. We also commonly see DC fast charging in communities that have high rates of individuals that cannot charge at home, such as multi-unit dwellings where they don't have access to that regular outlet or a level 2 charger where they park overnight. So community charging is another common form of DC fast charging and very important for enabling everybody to enjoy the benefits of electric vehicle ownership for those that have a personal vehicle. Next slide. So charging plugs, when we talk about electric vehicle charging, there are a couple different types of charging plugs, but the industry is largely forming around a couple standardized options. So in that level 1 and level 2 charging, most all vehicles use the J1772 plug standard. The only exception is Tesla, which uses its own plug type, though Tesla can also use that J1772 with an adapter. So with that standardized plug type, we ensure that all electric vehicles are able to use that level 2 charging station. Next slide. There's a couple more plug types that have been used for DC fast charging, but again, the industry is largely forming around one of them. So the CCS plug type, referred to as the combined charging standard, it's the same as that J1772 plug, just with 2 extra little pins at the bottom. That is used by all manufacturers with the exception of Tesla. The CHAdeMO plug type used to be used by the Nissan Leaf, is largely being phased out. CHAdeMO can also be used by Tesla with an adapter. And then of course, Tesla vehicles can use the Tesla plug type. Next slide. And then where do we find these charging stations and how do we access them? So there's a variety of resources available to find charging stations, which are being installed all across the state and the country. There are websites, there's a variety of apps. The apps can be both of those sources can be great as if the station is networked, which many of the public stations are networked. It allows you to see via that resource if the station is available for use right then and there. So you know before you arrive if the station's going to be available for you to charge. There are trip planners. Many vehicles now have, electric vehicles have in-car support. You can tell it the destination that you're traveling to, and it will map out where you should charge along the way if you will need a charge to get to your final destination. We do have a couple of the resources listed there. Alternative Fuel Data Center does independently verify all of the charging stations before they would be included on their site. So we recommend that one. And the 511PA website now includes the alternative fuel data centers map as a layer within it. So that is continues to be a one-stop shop for anyone looking to travel within the state. Next slide. Here we can see that map on 511PA. In Pennsylvania, there are now over 2,500 public charging plugs at over 1,000 locations. Nearly a quarter of them have been installed in the last year. So we can see that the growth in the charging stations is occurring pretty quickly. And generally 80% or more of those plugs are ones that can be used by any vehicles, with the other plugs being for Tesla vehicles. Next slide. Going along with the increase in charging stations, we are also seeing a large growth in the sales of electric vehicles in Pennsylvania. You see, especially in that model year in calendar year 2021, a very large increase, just over doubled the number of sales from the year before. So in 2019, approximately 0.9% of light duty vehicles sold in Pennsylvania were electric vehicles. 2020, that went to 1.3% of new vehicles. And in 2021, it went to 2.5% of new vehicles sold. So still sounds like overall small numbers, but very fast rate of increase. As we look to the future, we know those numbers are going to continue increasing as the manufacturers are making more models available. And many times right now, they have more trouble keeping up with the electric vehicle sales than their gasoline models. So they're quickly working to retool their facilities to try to keep up with the demand for their electric vehicle models. Next slide. So with that, I will pass it back to Natasha. Thanks.
Thank you, Colton. My name is Natasha Fackler, and I'm PennDOT's Policy Director, and I'm going to be giving you some overview of some of the work that PennDOT has been doing to prepare for electrification here in Pennsylvania. Right now, we've been working diligently to update our EV website so that information is easily available to all of you as you're looking to understand where we are going with our electrification plans. We also are working diligently on an EV mobility plan. It's a project we've been working on for over a year. This plan is one that really is looking at the mobility needs of individuals as they're traveling to and through our state related to using EVs. The plan specifically is looking at key corridors, in addition to our interstates, looking at all of our other corridors of significance that people use as they're traveling about in their daily plans. It also is looking to show key destinations across the state and ways that people will travel to and from those destinations. Another key component of the mobility plan is looking at emergency and evacuation travel, and making sure when there's key events throughout the year, like a flood or a snowstorm, that we have options available for individuals and electric cars to be supported in those needs. PennDOT also has been working with the Temple University program this year on a capstone project to put together an EV model ordinance. This ordinance is one that our local municipalities will be able to use as they develop and plan for EVs in their communities. It is one that will look at zoning, parking, and other things of importance as they think about where and how EV charging infrastructure will support the needs of their community members. PennDOT also put together some EV equity principles. These guiding principles were released in February and are on our website, but a full list of ways that we want to support the EV infrastructure coming into the state, but making sure it's also done in an equitable manner. And the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure State Plan is what the bulk of my slides and presentation will be about, but that is how we are preparing for the funding that's coming from the federal government. Next slide. So when the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed back in November, there were several buckets of funding that have come out related to electrification and eligibility. But the two main ones are here on the screen for you to see. The first is the National Electric Vehicle Formula Program. And this formula funding that's coming to the states is one where they are hoping the end goal is a consistent structure across all 50 states where people will be able to travel no matter what state they're in or where they're traveling, that they'll know that there's going to be EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure in place that will support them in their travels. So this is $5 billion across 5 years and across all of the states, including DC and Puerto Rico. And the funding is distributed out through formula. Pennsylvania, as you heard Secretary Gramian say, is slated to receive $171 million of that funding from the formula program. Also, later this fall is a discretionary grant program, and this is $2.5 billion across all 50 states. And this program is one where not just the states are eligible, but also our local governments and our MPOs and RPOs, kind of our planning partners, are going to be eligible to apply for that funding. And that funding is one that's really going to support outside of the corridors, some of the community charging needs that are going to be needed to support electrification. And that program, while we know it's coming out this fall, there's no set deadlines for when that is going to be announced yet. Next slide. So the National Electric Vehicle Formula Program is slated to work specifically on our alternative fuel corridors. So I want to take a couple minutes and explain to you about the Alternative Fuel Corridor Program. It's one that started in 2016. The federal government allowed states to identify and designate corridors that supported alternative fuel use. On this slide, you're seeing our electric vehicle corridors as they have been designated through the first 5 rounds of the Alternative Fuel Corridor Program. We do have on our website maps to show all of our alternative fuel corridors, but again, today's is specifically talking about the electric vehicle corridors. So during the first 5 rounds, we were able to designate all of our interstates here in Pennsylvania. We also have designated portions of US 30 and US Route 15. In the prior rounds of designation, there was criteria that allowed for pending and ready corridors. So a pending corridor meant that the next EV charging station was larger than 50 miles apart from the next one, and a ready corridor meant that it was within 50 miles of the next station. So when the national government came out with the NEVI formula program and the guidelines earlier this year in February, they changed some of the designation criteria, and I'm going to be talking about that on my next slide, but what you need to know is that we did not lose any of our alternative fuel corridor designations. We are just going to be required to build these out to the new specifications by the federal government with our NEVI formula funds that are coming to the state. Next slide. So to be a qualifying fast charging station on the alternative fuel corridors, there's some guidelines that the federal government released in February, and they're here on the screen for you to see. Those new stations must be within 1 mile of the alternative fuel corridor and within 50 miles of the next station. There also is some guidelines related to the power requirements and the type of charge connections that are at those sites. So making sure that there's ones that are publicly accessible to all users, that they have a certain connection, and that the power ports, that there's 4 of those with 150 kilowatt power per port for a total of 600 kilowatt total simultaneously being able to charge at the same time. So this is the guidelines for the alternative fuel corridors. Now, once the corridors are fully built out that you saw on the previous slide, we will be able to use that funding on additional corridors and other public spaces. And we also will be able to say what level of charging needs for those additional funds. So while these beginning ones must be DC fast chargers with the criteria you see here on the screen, once they're fully built out, we will have flexibility to use the funding in additional ways. Next slide. So over the last couple months, we've really been working to prepare for that NEVI state plan. So to be able to access the funding that's coming to the state, each state is required to submit a plan of how they will spend that money by August 1st. And that is what our team has been working on. The original guidance came out in February, and in May 13th, we are expected to receive, or by May 13th, we're expected to receive some additional guidance related to that program as we are putting our plans together. We also are preparing and doing a lot of data analysis on corridors and other travel ways to make sure that we are helping to have our planning partners ready and eligible to apply for the discretionary funding once it becomes available later this fall. Next slide. So the NEVI state plan that is required by August 1st has 14 key sections of the report that are required, and each state will have to do that prior to being able to spend any of their NEVI funds. And right here in the screen, you see those 14 sections of the report. But the main one that we are talking about today with all of you is public engagement. We've really been wanting to make sure that we're hearing voices of those around the state as we're putting our plan together and making sure that that engagement helps us to guide and put our plan components together. Next slide. As part of the plan, each state is required to say what their goals are related to the funding that is coming to us. And we have put together a mission statement to strategically deploy a convenient, reliable, affordable, and equitable electric vehicle charging network to support range confidence for Pennsylvanians and visitors. And to support that, our goals are here on the screen. High level, we want to make sure that the system is consistent and robust and is available where people want to charge them. We also want to make sure it's safe and convenient for our travelers. We also, as we are distributing the funds, want to make sure that it's being done equitably and making opportunities for those in underserved and rural communities. We also are really taking some time to understand the workforce and job impacts to make sure that Pennsylvania workforce is prepared for this new technology and ways to support it. And also, as we think ahead, looking at ways that electrification can support our freight and good movements throughout our Commonwealth. Next slide. So as I was mentioning a few minutes ago, we have been doing a robust round of stakeholder and outreach. Throughout the month of April, we had 7 stakeholder sessions a few weeks ago, and you can see those here on the screen. PennDOT is not the expert on all things electrification. There's definitely components of that we needed to learn from our utility partners, from the electric vehicle charging companies themselves, and from some of the other groups you see here on the screen, including workforce needs. Earlier today, we had a legislative webinar for our legislators and their staff, and the public webinar that all of you are on now. But in May, we are going to be going back out for some additional stakeholder meetings and are going to be putting together a survey tool to capture feedback on components of the state plan. Again, we wanted to make sure that we heard voices throughout the process and had them to help inform us as we put the plan together versus putting a plan together and get feedback afterwards. We are hoping to submit our plan earlier than the August 1st deadline. So in June and July, we will be working to draft that plan and do all the levels of review to help get it finalized. Next slide. So during the April outreach that we did a few weeks ago, we have here on the screen some of the key voices and things that we heard throughout those sessions. I will say, as a summary of what we heard, the biggest takeaway from all of those sessions is that everyone wants us to keep open lines of communication as we develop our state plan and making sure that there's plenty of opportunity for input along the way. So those stakeholder sessions you saw on the previous slide is one way that we're doing that. Our survey tool and resource account that we set up are another way that we're making sure that we have plenty of opportunity to receive questions from people and input as we put the plan together. Another big takeaway from those meetings was understanding what business model we will be using to distribute the funding and what criteria we will be using to evaluate proposals, making sure that we are transparent in that process and that everyone understands how we will be distributing the funds and how they will be evaluated. Next slide. So we're going to take a quick break. We do have more presentation, but I know some questions have been coming in through the chat function. And so we're going to take a quick break, and the moderator is going to be able to read some of those questions, and Colton and I will answer them here for you during the presentation.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. There are a lot of really good questions in here. First, it says, in 2022, Pennsylvania seems to be doing a lot for commercial business and public entities to deploy charging infrastructure, but little is done to help the individual consumer purchasing a car. Any tax breaks are for cars under 50K, which represents very few electric cars at this time. Additionally, many states provide big breaks, tax rebates, et cetera, to install level two charging infrastructure at their homes. Is Pennsylvania planning to dedicate any funds in 2022 to assist residents at home as well?
Colton, I'll let you answer that.
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit more about the available incentive programs that we have. But those points are accurate. The rebate that we have, it does have a purchase price cap of 50,000. Pennsylvania, we do not have an incentive program for at-home charging. Us at the state level, we are making use of the funding sources that we have available. I don't believe the NEVI program that we're talking about today has the ability to provide any incentives for individual purchases or at-home charging. So we do not have those resources or tools available, and I can't comment on any potential revenues to be able to do so.
Thank you. We're going to ask 2 more questions during this break, and then there will be time for additional questions at the end. Please explain if Pennsylvania can consider 2 technologies: inductive power transfer for wireless EV charging and linear induction motors for propelling EVs on the highway without using battery power. The former would make plug-in charging stations obsolete, and the latter would the latter could enable essentially unlimited EV range. Do we have any information with these technologies here in Pennsylvania, Colton?
So I know both of those technologies are certainly on the newer side, certainly things that we will be interested to see how they come along and are developed and implemented in vehicles. The plug that we use to plug into vehicles, the J1772, we've had that standard for about a decade now. The standard for inductive charging, I believe, was just finalized about a year ago. So manufacturers have not yet had, since it takes them 5 to 6 years to develop a model, they've not yet had time to incorporate that into the new vehicles that they're making, so they would come with that ability. Obviously, these are methods of charging that add some cost to the infrastructure, but then take down some cost on the vehicle and then make it more user-friendly as well. So we'll certainly look to those technologies as they continue to be developed and refined.
Thanks. And this is the last one for this section here. Are electric charging stations going to be installed at the rest areas on I-81 and I-78? I'm assuming that's the department's rest areas.
Thank you for the question. At this time, we are not able to install those chargers at our rest areas due to some federal and state laws that prohibit us from charging fees for the electrification at the rest areas. So we are looking into those laws, and many states are having discussions related to that, but at this time we are not able to install them at those venues.
Okay, thanks. And we'll be having more questions later in the program.
Next slide, please.
All right, thank you. So as mentioned, I'm just going to do an overarching summary of some of the things that the DEP has been doing to support electric vehicles thus far and continuing to do that will build into and complement these efforts that the PennDOT will be able to do with the infrastructure funds. So we do have a variety of incentive programs that are available. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail. That can be its own hour-long webinar. We do have through Driving PA Forward in its programs, We have a level 2 rebate program that is available to any organization. So it is not for individuals, but it is for any organization that's a business, a local government, a nonprofit, to install level 2 charging in a public place, at a multi-unit dwelling, or workplaces. So through that program, we have thus far helped fund the installation of over 1,400 level 2 charging plugs throughout the state. There's another 500 or so charging plugs that are in progress through that program. So it has been a great resource. Look to driving PA forward if that's something of interest to you. We also have a competitive grant program for DC fast charging, both in communities and along travel corridors. So far through that program, we have awarded 18 projects with about 50 DC fast charging plugs. 7 of those projects have thus far been completed, and we do hope to make another announcement of awards through that program yet this year. As mentioned, I'll discuss the rebate for consumers in a little more detail in a moment. We do also have a grant program called the Alternative Fuel Incentive Grant Program for any fleets that are looking to transition to an alternative fuel, which would include electric vehicles. So any local government, business, nonprofit can look to that program. It is competitive. It generally opens late spring-ish. So it will be looking to open sometime here soon. And that is to help incentivize fleets to transition their current fleet vehicles from gasoline or diesel to an alternative fuel. I will discuss the coalition a little more detail on the next slide. And next here we have the electricity rate design study for electric vehicle charging. This is a new effort that my office has just kicked off recently. So if most electric vehicle charging were to occur in the afternoon hours, when demand on the electric grid is already high, that would place additional strain on the electric grid. So we are really looking to see, but on the flip side, if most charging occurs during the overnight hours when the grid has lots of spare capacity, it can actually be very good for our electric grid. It can actually place downward pressure on our electricity prices and result in everybody, including those that do not own electric vehicles, paying less per unit for their electricity. So we are working on a study analyzing the current rate designs, essentially how people pay for their electricity, with individuals, businesses, commercial, within Pennsylvania, and what sorts of alternatives could be put in place that would be beneficial to utilities, to ratepayers for electricities, and for the electric vehicle owners as well. And then lastly, we of course do a lot of public and stakeholder education, including right now. Next slide. So in 2019, DEP, in consultation with our partners on the Drive Electric Coalition, we published the Pennsylvania Electric Vehicle Roadmap. So it included 13 recommended actions for increasing electric vehicle adoption in Pennsylvania, which has really guided much of our efforts and our work since then. Additionally, in 2021, we released an update in booklet format to the EV roadmap. So that is a very great resource if you're looking for an introduction to electric vehicles, the programs available in Pennsylvania, and what's going on and what you can do to be part of it. Both of these things we did in partnership with our Drive Electric Pennsylvania Coalition, which largely consists of quarterly meetings that PennDOT and DEP jointly coordinate to keep anyone that's interested up to date on the latest electric vehicle information for Pennsylvania. So you can find information on that and attend the meetings as well. They are open to anyone if desired. Next slide. So lastly, the one program I want to cover in a little more detail is the rebate program that we have for individuals. So anyone purchasing an electric vehicle with a purchase price of less than $50,000 in Pennsylvania is eligible for this. Electric vehicles, it's a rebate of $750 for new or used. Plug-in hybrid, it's $500 for new or used. For a used vehicle to be eligible, it does need to be one-time used and have miles of less than 75,000 at the time of purchase. Households that qualify, that are low income qualifying, do receive an additional $1,000 on top of the amount listed above. And especially when paired with the federal tax credit, this can be a great way to help with that upfront purchase price of the electric vehicle. As we know, that is one of the barriers for electric vehicle adoption that is working to be addressed over time. Next slide. And I'll kick it back to Natasha.
Thanks, Colton, for that explanation about your incentive programs. So we are going to take some time now to answer questions. They have been rolling in during the last few minutes. So we're going to try to get through as many of them as we can during the webinar. Any that we do not get to, we will post the answers afterwards on our website. We also will be posting a copy of the presentation on our website once it is ready. If you do have any additional questions, you can send them in through the resource account, not just during today's presentation, but also in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator to start asking some of the questions that have come in.
Great, thanks, Natasha. So here's a question. Beyond the federally funded NEVI program, which is focused on EV fast charging deployment across highway corridors, how will Pennsylvania ensure that dense urban communities and multifamily residences will have access to EV charging?
Thanks, Alexis, for that question. So the NEVI formula funding, while it is initially slated to only fill in those alternative fuel corridors until they're fully built out, once that is certified by the federal government to be done, we will have the options to use that funding in more public spaces and community options. So there will be additional opportunity for the NEVI funds for some of that charging. There also is the discretionary funding that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. And half of that $2.5 billion is slated to be for communities and making sure that there's options for those who don't have public charging or don't have individual charging at their homes. Perhaps they live in a multi-unit dwelling, have street parking or other shared spots where they don't have the same parking space every evening. So there will be additional buckets of money and funding opportunities moving forward to support those needs.
Thank you. Another question, when will rural municipalities be able to apply for the discretionary funding?
So we do not have a date yet from the federal government when that is coming out. All we know right now is sometime this fall. So we'll keep everyone up to date on that. We do have on our website some new data on the different programs. So as they're rolling out, we'll make sure to have information available quickly for you to find. There also is federal government websites that also have that, but it has not been announced yet.
Thank you. So has there been talk of a per kilowatt hour tariff across the entire electricity grid as a new transportation tax? What ways do you think are the most practicable to replace the decline in gas tax? There's sort of two questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's a two-part question there. So I will say overall on the ways to replace the loss of revenues from electric vehicles and those that are more fuel efficient. We are, Pennsylvania, as Secretary Gramian talked about earlier, really in a lot of discussions on ways to make sure that our funding is replaced. Through our PA's Pathway program, we are looking at different funding options, including one that looks at mileage-based user fees and other ways that we can support that. We also are working with our legislature to make sure that we can have an option to make sure that electric vehicle owners are paying for their use of the roadway. Colton, I think you unmuted to talk maybe about the rates.
Yeah, not too much to add there. Thanks. Yeah, there's not currently any rate on the kilowatt usage to fund transportation or electric vehicle charging stations, and we wouldn't comment on any proposed or pending legislation.
Thanks. Does the Commonwealth plan on owning or operating charging stations? If so, when should consumers expect these charging stations to be operational?
So the Commonwealth right now, at least PennDOT is not hoping to own or operate any of the infrastructure being built through the NEVI funding. Those will be distributed out through a program that will go to either electric vehicle charging companies or site hosts or a combination of such. There is some infrastructure being built by the Commonwealth now that supports the Commonwealth fleet. There is a goal of our governor to have a certain amount of the Commonwealth fleet vehicles transitioned over to electric vehicle or to plug-in hybrid vehicles. And so we are in the process of building infrastructure to support those. I do know that one example of use of the Volkswagen settlement funding that Colton could talk about a little bit more if questions are there, but in some of our state parks across Pennsylvania, there has been public-facing charging infrastructure installed that you can use while you are at the state parks.
Yes, our Department of Conservation and Natural Resources has definitely been working to install public and free charging at many of the state parks throughout our state. So that is available. That's the only instance of the Commonwealth directly owning and providing that service. All other level 2 or DC fast charging stations that DEP has been funding do go to other entities.
Thank you. Has there been concern from the public or from the business community that EV charging stations will take parking away from non-EV vehicles? And if so, what's being done to mitigate those concerns?
I would say that that's going to be up to communities as they think about their ordinances and that govern kind of parking and where those can go. I think some of that will come out through planning in the local municipalities. There is, an option for spaces to be shared and not be just for electric charging. So I think some of that will be yet to be determined as they're being built out further.
Thank you. Intercity buses are a key segment of Pennsylvania's transportation network, particularly in the rural areas of the state. How is PennDOT considering the needs of medium and heavy duty vehicle charging in its NEVI guidance?
So there is actually some specific funding coming out from the federal government for buses. So there is a program for school buses. There's also one for transit buses. So there is additional funding outside of the NEVI program that will be related to some of the medium and heavy duty fleets. There's actually over 18 or 19 federal programs that have eligibility related to electrification, and some of them are specifically tied to medium and heavy duty use cases versus a personal vehicle. So we are starting to look at that. We also are working with a group that's doing some analysis for us on key corridors that support medium and heavy duty infrastructure and where we might need that EV charging infrastructure to support those moving forward as well.
Thank you. How many consumers have used the EV rebate program, and do we have a sense of, or is the data available, I guess, on the breakdown of vehicles receiving the rebates? How many are EVs or plug-in hybrid EVs, motorcycles, et cetera?
Sure, we're getting these are so many great questions. It's from my office, but it's a colleague of mine that manages the individual rebate program. I do not have exact numbers off the top of my head. I know it is thousands that program has helped support. Sorry, what are the other pieces of that question?
If we have a sense of the breakdown of how many of the different vehicle types are receiving those rebates, like how many plug-in hybrids, how many EVs, et cetera. So we can get back to you on that question.
Yeah, definitely. I believe the general breakdown follows what you would expect based off of the statewide sales. So about a quarter to 1/3 are plug-in hybrids. But yeah, we can follow up with more exact numbers.
Okay, great, thank you. Does the Commonwealth have a position regarding public DC fast charging fees? Should they be charged per kilowatt or per time? I'm not sure if we have a position on that or if that's something that we're still discussing.
At DEP, we don't have a position there. I think we would generally advocate for the fee to be affordable, which we would generally mean is comparable or less than the equivalent price of gasoline. But we would not have, at least DEP at this time does not advocate or have a preference on the manner in which those fees are charged.
Where can we get a copy of the EV model ordinance?
So the model ordinance is being finalized and should be up on our website later this week.
Great. Currently, who pays for power from these fast charging stations that are out?
So most of the time, a charging station, will charge the customer a fee for the use of the station. Sometimes they don't. That's really up to who owns the charging station and kind of how their business model works. There's many places where they may put in charging for free, knowing that it will draw in customers, so they have a business inside of their store. But it's entirely up to whoever is managing that charging station. What cost they're passing along. If they pass along a cost, it's generally the price of electricity plus some cost for the station maintenance and upkeep.
Thanks. Once the interstate corridors are built out from the NEVI funding, will the MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations be receiving any of those leftover NEVI funds for local infrastructure, EV infrastructure projects?
So the MPOs and RPOs are eligible to apply for the discretionary funds. They also, we will be working with the MPOs and RPOs, our planning partners, as we think about where charging needs are across the state and ways that we can fill those gaps. So that will be a conversation that we can have with them as we continue to fill out our corridors across the state.
Thank you. Is there any plan to bring convenience stores and current fuel retailers into the NEVI program? Are you planning to work with the utilities to promote a more competitive market to provide EV chargers? Again, 2 questions.
So we are working with lots of individual business models to say where EV charging can go. We don't believe that EV charging infrastructure only fits one model. So, there's potential for this infrastructure to go at places outside of the gas station model. So convenience stores, obviously, that we're talking about, but obviously other options might be hotels, restaurants, shopping plazas, grocery stores, other places that people go and are going to spend some time at those locations while their vehicle is charging. So there's a lot of business models out there that support EV charging infrastructure to be at their business. And then I've already forgotten the second part of the question. I'm sorry.
The second part was, are you going to work with the utilities to promote a competitive market to provide EV chargers?
So we have been in conversation with the utilities. They know that this is coming, not just Pennsylvania utilities, but all across the country. Utility companies are preparing for electrification needs, and we're really looking at their process, how they do site analysis, et cetera. And so I think just continuing to work with them as we move forward with our state plan. We here in Pennsylvania did put together a survey and have been gathering some information from our utilities so that we can better understand their process and how we can support that as we put together the NEVI state plan.
Thank you. Will the public have the opportunity to comment on the PA EV infrastructure plan?
Yes, so we will be putting out a survey tool sometime in May that will have components of the state plan, and they will be able to look at those pieces of the plan and be able to comment on it.
Great. And I don't know what this question means, but I assume that you will. Any thoughts on the round 6 alternative fuel corridor nominations?
Yes, so As you might have heard earlier in the presentation about alternative fuel corridors, there were 5 rounds previously that were used to designate corridors. And we have talked internally. We've met with all of our planning partners. We've talked to our Clean Cities teams. And we are going to be nominating 2 additional corridors to be added as alternative fuel corridors in round 6. That application is due May 13th to the federal government. And then we'll find out if those are approved to be additional corridors. I should say 2 additional electric vehicle corridors. We also have one that's not electric vehicle that we are also nominating.
And then I guess tacking on some things that you've mentioned is that this is 1 round, and there's certainly a possibility for the future, and not being a fuel corridor does not mean that it can't get charging in the future as well.
Thank you, Colton. And I will also add, as part of our NEVI state plan, we will be showing some key corridors that we think should also be considered in future AFC designation rounds as well, as we think about the key corridors that people travel through our state to the places they need to go.
Thank you. So this is going to be our last question. Just a reminder that if we didn't get to your question during this time, we will be responding to you directly and sharing that the questions that we got on our website after this. So thanks again. The last question is, what is the typical cost to fully charge your vehicle at a DC charging station?
So it depends on a variety of factors. In particular, how much is that site host choosing to charge the customer? So, it's pretty common for DC fast charging costs to be per minute or per kilowatt hour. If it's per kilowatt hour, maybe somewhere in the 30 to 40 cent range. So that's going to put your, equivalent, if you were paying gasoline, somewhere in the $3 to $4 range. It's not too far outside of what you would expect. DC fast charging does typically, cost a little bit more than level 2 or what you might spend at home, because the infrastructure itself has some more cost associated with it. So in general, to fully charge that vehicle on a per mile basis, you could hopefully expect it to be comparable or a little less than you would for a gasoline vehicle getting the same amount of miles of range.
Thank you, Colton. And we do want to thank everyone who participated in our webinar today. We hope this is the first of several conversations that we will have with the general public as we are continuing to put our NEVI state plan together. And if you do have any questions that didn't get answered, as Alexis mentioned, we will be posting the answers to those on our website, as well as this recording of the presentation today. So thank you again for your time and for joining us today for this presentation.